Hi folks, so wanted to shoot a quick video of a DIY project here that as much Googling as I could do, I couldn't find anybody that had done something like this before. So I'm an amateur fabricator at best, so don't look at anything too closely here. But I built this smoker a couple of years ago. It used a traditional offset firebox here, which I had welded into the side. And while it worked just fine, you always had to be out here messing with the fire. And so what I wanted to do was try and turn it into a Traeger or a Pellet Pro, an automatic pellet smoking grill. So Googling around, you can pick up a Pellet Pro for $500, but I was looking at just the components to make a Pellet Pro, and you can pick all the bits and pieces up to make yourself what you need for less than $200. So I thought, well, I've already got a smoker that weighs a couple hundred pounds. I'm gonna try and make my own pellet hopper assembly. So what I did, so if you go online, all this stuff's on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description down below here, but you can buy the auger assembly, the heating element to light off the burn pot, the blower fan, the auger feed motor, the controller, the temperature probes for your meat and for your grill, as well, a power cord, all the hardware to put all this stuff together, less than $200. And so, given that I've got a couple hundred pounds of steel and probably 100 hours into welding up the existing smoker, I'm gonna try and piece together my own pellet hopper assembly for my smoker. So step one here for me was to build the auger pellet feeding assembly here. So this stainless steel bit was a part that I bought on Amazon, as was the auger. And so this is one of the longer augers because my smoker is 36 inches wide. So I wanted to get into the middle of it. So this is like I think it's an 18-inch auger or something like that. And so you need a big piece of iron in order to build your hopper assembly. So these burn pots here are almost 4 inches deep. And so what I actually started with here was a 5x5 inch 3/16 thick square tube. Didn't have to be 3/16, but that's all I could find at my local steel supply. So I started with a big honking piece of iron here. Went ahead just using a jigsaw and some metal blades and cut the round hole in the end, and then drilled and tapped these. These were M6x1. That's the hardware that came with it. And then because my smoker is only 18 inches deep, you have to account for a kind of a height stack up here when you're putting this thing together. So they say with this burn pot in, you need 3 inches above it for a heat dispersion plate. And then you need a couple inches above that for where you actually want your grates to be. And so doing the stack up in my grill here, if I started here, went up 5 inches, then went up another 3 inches, I'm already into the kind of rack area of my smoker. So what I did is I cut an inch out of the bottom of this. And what I'm gonna do is stick it straight into the bottom of my smoker, tack weld it in place, and then just use high temp RTV because the bottom end of the smoker is just, and this is covered in grease, it's been power washed out. Tack weld it in a couple of places along here, stick it out the side, and then RTV it so that it has to be airtight, because what you need is that fan motor, which will mount back in here somewhere to be blowing air down into the burn pot assembly. So this all has to be airtight here. All right, so fast forwarding a little bit here, skipped all of the fabrication steps, but just wanted to give you an idea of what this is all gonna look like going together now. So hardest part of this whole deal was really making this burner tube assembly. Again, this was 5x5, 3/16 square tube that I started with here. Cut out the hole for the burner assembly here. Just used a jigsaw for that with a metal blade on it and took my time making that cut. So burner is going to mount here. You can see that I put a flange onto this as well so that it can bolt in to the side of the smoker. Next then we made a cutout so that this is where the pellets are actually going to feed down into the inside here. So this is my little feed assembly here that I made up that will mate up with the auger tube. Auger tube is just 1 5/8 exhaust piping, 16 gauge stuff. That's what's needed to mate up with the burn pot on this side. And then really just made a cradle back here for the hopper assembly. So all this iron here in here is to mount the hopper box. So the hopper box is just 16-inch steel that I formed up. The inside bendy stuff here is 22 gauge, and really this hopper box is just going to sit right on top of this feed assembly here and be held in with a couple of bolts on the bottom. So key here is that this whole thing can come apart. The auger tube then will feed into the back end of this whole assembly here. So you can see there's a hole cut there. The auger tube will feed right down inside all of that. And then on the back side of that, the auger feed motor, which is this guy, just sits freely back here and pins into the auger. On the underside of this then is the spot for the blower fan. So you can see here I've got a big hole cut. That's like a 4.5-inch hole, and drilled and tapped some holes there, and that's where the induction fan is going to blow up into this tube and then down into the fire pot there. The whole control assembly, again, all Traeger parts, just cut a hole into the side of the auger assembly here, and this thing is going to bolt, bolt right up in here. Everything's plug and play, and we'll be off and running. So next I'll show you it all together in the final completed smoker here. So we've got the hopper tube, feed tube, whatever you want to call it, now mounted down in the bottom of the smoker here. The fire pot is in. You can see I put some little standoffs off of it, because what we do then is, this is a piece of 3/16 stainless steel that I got. This is just 16 gauge stuff, and that is a heat diffuser for the flame that will be coming out of that fire pot. I'm using some high temp silicone, the Silbond RTV 6500, so this is good for 500 continuous or up to 650 degrees for a little while at least, it says. So I just decided to kind of stick this thing down. There's a bolt on the one end there to hold this tube assembly in. So it's bolted down, it's RTV'd in, and then you can see on this side how this hopper assembly kind of goes together. So I'm using a cork rubber gasket. This is just available at your hardware store. I've got this all RTV'd in down here, so you can see this is the little auger feed motor. The tube is mounted in the back here. I RTV'd this up so that this is airtight, and you can now see kind of how the hopper assembly is going to bolt onto the back, and it's just going to sit on this flange and on this flange over here. You can see there is a little bit of an air gap here between the smoker and the box of pellets that will ultimately be sitting right about in here. And that's just so my pellets don't get as hot as my smoker does. You want a little bit of an air gap in there so that your pellets don't get hot when this thing's on. All right, we're gonna put the hopper box on next. Okay, so just a quick update video. This is, I'll call it sort of a long-term review of how the smoker's working. So this is what the hopper assembly looks like now that I've got it all mounted here. I put my control panel right up in the front here. Again, this is just one of those kind of generic control panels that you can buy off of Amazon. Works great. Everything's plug and play. All my induction fan motor and auger fan and everything are mounted down underneath below the auger box. Pellets are in here, holds about 20 pounds of pellets. Been pretty happy. I'm doing about, for 250 degrees Fahrenheit, about 2 pounds per hour with this setup, which reading is exactly what the Traegers are using. Main difference being is that this is built out of 3/16 and it weighs a couple 100 pounds. One of the things that I've learned here, so first is that I'll comment, the RTV that I use, the high temp RTV, actually worked really well. So I haven't had any trouble with the high temp RTV. This is my drip pan. So the drip pan mounts, there's actually the 3/16 or 3/16 stainless steel kind of diffuser plate underneath this drip pan, which you can't see. The drip pan, just to keep stuff from moving down onto the flame, is this drip pan, and where your temperature sensor mounts makes a really huge difference. So this is my temp sensor. This is what comes on your Traeger grills. Ended up building a complete box enclosure for this, because what was happening was every time that flame would turn on, you'd get a blast of hot air past this drip pan. It'd hit that temperature sensor and it would think it's at temperature, and it wasn't even close. So when I run this thing, I actually close this gap completely. I push this drip pan all the way up against the side, so there's almost no air coming through this end and hitting that temp sensor, and the grate slide over the top like this. So if you're thinking about doing something like this, pay special attention to where the temp sensor mounts, and you might want to build a box around it, because otherwise the flame turns on, then it turns off, then it turns on, then it turns off, and it just turns into a big pain in the butt. So build yourself a box, pay special attention where to put your temp sensor. But overall, very happy with it. You know, this was an offset smoker that I had built a while ago. There was just a traditional firebox over here. And again, for about 180 bucks, not including the steel, was able to kind of fab up my my own DIY Traeger. So give it a shot and have fun out there. Happy smoking.